go ahead. I'm going to pass the presenter rights to Marion. And okay, Marion, there you are. Okay. and here you go, and here she comes.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne Marie, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm having one of those days where my computer is going crazy, so hopefully it will just control itself for the next 40 minutes or whatever we have here. So my job today is to just take you through what your coaches have been doing for the last couple of months and what we're looking at for now through June, I guess. And I know some of you, I recognize some of your names, so I know some of you have been in these trainings, and so this will just be a recap for you. If you've been attending the content standards trainings, could you just type yes in the chat so I can see who, how many of you have heard all this before? Angie, yes. Lorraine, okay, I recognize your names. All right, well, you guys can pipe up in the chat and correct me if I'm wrong or if I forget something. And Kay, thank you. Okay, so this is the third webinar for managers to keep you up to date on this project, and it's the last one. It's the third of 3. So let's see where we are at this point. You might remember this graphic from the last couple of webinars. We were going through the stages of these. The blue down here is the stages of this actual project. So we started out with understanding the content standards and then planning for instruction. The coaches were planning with staff and doing the gap analysis and starting to coach individual teachers. Then we worked on planning for implementation and sustainability, and we're just moving. We have one more webinar that's kind of content heavy about with things to implement as far as coaching and content standards. And we're moving into the observing implementation phase. So that means your coaches will be spending more time working with individual teachers or small groups of teachers, observing and coaching. So we focused a lot on coaching in the last couple of things we've done. That's where we are. Here's of all the things we've done. So these events will look familiar to you starting last April. So gosh, it's almost a year now. And the big training was in August. And then we've had a pre and a post webinar for the coaches for each of the face-to-face trainings. So we did that for all the trainings, the 6 regional trainings in November. We caught up with you guys in December. We had a one-day training at the Taylor conference a couple of weeks ago. And then this is your managers webinar today. We have the coaches post webinar at the beginning of March, and then we have 3 wrap-up webinars for them, March, April, and May. So that's the plan for the rest of the year. Your coach has been doing in January and February since we last talked to you in December. So pre-webinar in January, right before the February 3rd training. Here's the agenda of that webinar. If you remember, we interested and talked about rubrics in the webinar before that. So we reviewed some of that and looked at some of the rubrics that they had posted in COP. Then we looked at a document called Behavior Checklist for Mentors. So just like some standards kind of for what's a good mentor, how to be a good mentor. Then we talked about getting ready for the face-to-face on February 3rd. And they had an assignment. So this is what they had done up to that point. They started out with standards. This is really tiny. I don't know if you can see this. Full screen if you want to, right? So you could see it a little bigger. Starting with standards, then introducing some coaching concepts, focus on lesson planning, backwards design for lesson planning, formative assessment as part of the lesson, and then rubrics as part of formative assessment. And then at the same time, you are all working on your curriculum analysis and deciding which areas of the content standards needed to have better coverage in your curriculum. Now we're at a stage of, you have that gap analysis, and now the goal is to fill in those gaps and make sure we're covering those things. And hopefully to have those gaps filled in the start of the new year in July. That might not be the case for everyone, but that's the goal. So we've focused on curriculum with gap analysis. Then now we're going to really look at coaching, and then coaching and whatever else. We have 3 more wrap-up webinars with the coaches. We'll be doing a survey of what topic would help them and support them in their coaching and in their working with the teachers. So, and you're welcome to email me. My email is at the end of this slide, so you're welcome to email me or Beth, John, or Anne Marie, or any of us. And if you have thoughts about what you think your coaches need in the next few months. Let me go back to that for a second. One thing we will be doing is have some of the participants that have been making good progress with their program share in the follow-up webinars what they're doing so that people can hear from each other, not just in the face-to-face and not just on the ECOP, but also in the webinars. So we'll be looking for those people. So I looked at the behavior checklist and 3 sections to it. The first one is being an active learner. And here are the elements of being an active learner. Except that I'm learning from my coachee so that it's not just a one-way street. We're learning from each other. Model reflecting on my own work. So we're asking teachers to reflect on their work and think about how they're implementing the standards. So we need to model that ourselves and show how we're doing that kind of think aloud with our coaches, as I'm calling them. Be open to feedback and willing to adapt, of course. Establish goals together, and we've talked a lot about this really since the beginning. Establishing goals and making those mutual goals so that it's not a goal that's imposed from above, although the standards are being imposed in a way, but how the teachers want to grapple with that is really for them. And my own knowledge of content and emerging research. I can't even see that. Yeah, so that's one an active learner. A lot about collaboration, the importance of collaboration, and that chance favors the connected mind. In other words, I have a little video that talks about how great ideas arise and how they're not just, they just, E=mc² didn't pop into Einstein's brain, but it was part of a process that a lot of people contributed to as thinking developed, and it's true for us as well. An area of that behavior checklist is support personal growth. So here are the elements of that. Being able to articulate the art of teaching, and it is an art, not a science. We do research and we try to all our teaching strategies evidence-based, but there's so many variables there that there's definitely an element of art there that's sometimes hard to articulate. Help teachers establish goals. We talked about that a little bit already. Don't need to prove my competence. And this is a subtle thing, but we like to have the answers and we like to give the answers. So it's important to let people discover on their own, teachers, not just students. So really it's translating a lot of what we know about teaching into the coaching process. Know, share, let teachers discover. Learner-centered approaches with teachers. So teachers are probably, for the most part, very learner-centered in their classroom. We just need to make ourselves aware to follow those same principles when working with teachers. Encourage teachers to make their own assessment conclusions and decisions. So that's part of their professional growth. Set expectations and build on strengths. So of course, that's what we do with our students, and we want to do that with our teachers as well. That the learner-centered approach to coaching, and this will probably look familiar to you as something that we do in the classroom. So I tried to just translate that into the coaching process. Instead of just focusing on the teacher, we want to focus on the coach. We want to focus on both, the pair or the small group. And it's not just the coach talks and the teacher listens, but it's an interactive process. And the teachers are working with each other if possible. I know sometimes it's hard to pull that off, but the more collaborative this process can be, the more fruitful it's going to be, I think. then some more, and this is just reiterating some of the things we said before, that we want teachers to find their own answers and have some choice of the topics that they focus on, and do their own self-evaluation. The area of that checklist is communicate effectively, and didn't do that in the webinar because we focused on that in the training. Now to the February 3rd training. Here was the agenda for that day. The first part you can see is focused around the gap analysis and curriculum resources. And that was and let us know how to make this bigger if you want to. Very fruitful part of the more thought, and you guys who were there, feel free to put something in the chat if you have some thoughts about that. So we looked at that, and then we focused on coaching strategies, and in particular giving feedback. And we did watched a video, and then we did some role playing around that. First part was about addressing the gaps, and people were asked to bring their gap analysis or bring some kind, and it might just be in their mind, but a good understanding of what the gaps were that they found and what resources have they found to fill those gaps. In looking at the gap analyses, John Stevens had received them all by this point, and we kind of went back and forth on what should be the topics. Of course, we couldn't talk about everything, so we had 10 topics, and they were each at a table, and people divided up into their content area and then topics, and shared resources for each of those gaps. So I'm going to show you what the topics were. So in English language arts, there was basic computer skills, research, and listening and speaking. There were, of course, other issues as well, but these were the ones that probably were mentioned the most times in all the gap analyses. And probably research was one mentioned the most. And so people brought their resources about these things, and I think we got some really useful lists of resources we'll share on the COP. The topics were algebraic relationships, and then graphing was called out particularly under that standard of algebraic relationships, and then financial literacy was one that I think a lot of programs hadn't really been looking at. They are starting to look at that, and there were a lot of resources to share about that. ESL is a little bit different, so we focused on the top substandards rather than the still standards, because ESL is leveled. So it didn't quite make sense to look at each standard of each level because there were something like, I don't remember the number, probably remember the number though. So I chose these four: critically to analyze information, use digital resources, consider context, audience, and and integrate graphics or multimedia into written compositions. So everybody divided up and focused on those 10 topics for 20 minutes, and then they switched to another topic, and then they switched to another topic. So a lot of people stayed within their content area, although, of course, some teachers went back and forth. Some coaches, I should say, went back and forth between math and ELA. So a one page or a couple of pages list of resources for each of those topics. And those are not yet posted, but they are available, and they will be posted shortly, I believe. Went from that information to planning. So you have these gaps, now have these resources. Now, what do we need to do in order to really fill those gaps in the next 5 or 6 months? So we provided a template, and people worked either individually or with their team, making a plan for the next 6 months. There were 3 parts to that template. The first was curriculum material. So this is what they had just talked about. Let's say they pick one. They are going to take an action in relation to that. They need a timeline, so we're going to do this by when and who's going to do it, and then a place for additional notes if they have any. So that was the Oh, I guess I got all the parts. There was curriculum planning, there was professional development, and then there was other. And then we asked there was a page like this that was on professional development. So if you're going to implement a new piece of curriculum, what professional development do you need for your teachers so that they're comfortable and competent in using that material? And thus we collected, they took a picture of it and sent it to Beth Ponder so that TCAL could know what the professional development coming soon we're going to be. Moved on to giving feedback. So we looked at this video, an example of feedback. So this is a video from K-12, and this coach is very, very focused and goes through 6 steps of giving feedback effectively in like about 3.5 minutes of edited video. So we looked at that. And these were the 6 steps that she went through, beginning with praise and precise praise, not just good job, but I really like the way you organized the agenda for the day and the students knew what they were going to do the next 3 hours. That's to celebrate success. Of course, there were some good things, and we need to celebrate those things. Ask a targeted question about you're going to focus on in the feedback. So you're going to only focus on one thing, maybe just how did you teach vocabulary and how did that go? And give evidence and rationale for the problem or the issue. Stay concrete action, and then give an opportunity to practice. So let's say you're going to, I think the example in the video was about reading, about decreasing the rigor too quickly. So she was giving too many hints. So they actually practiced in the coaching session what you would say to a student that couldn't answer a question before going to another student and having them give the answer. Other things that we looked at about what makes feedback effective, and these are similar to what came from the behavior checklist. One of them was to focus what actually happened in the class, not what was said or done. Why sort of takes you in a different direction, can feel kind of accusatory and end up with defensiveness. It's all about sharing information, not giving advice. And that's us teachers, we have to struggle with that, not giving advice. So we want to include high-level questioning, so sort of like overall, why are we doing this? Or not why are we doing this, but what is the purpose of the behavior we're working on? And it takes into account the needs of the receiver, and we spent some time on that, like how do you like to get feedback? Do you like straight and to the point? Do you want to have it a little bit sugar-coated? Are you going to get defensive no matter what it is, but it's okay, you'll get over it? So people are different in terms of how they accept feedback. So we looked at all those, and we looked at the video again, and we did an observation checklist for all these things, the 6 steps and the other behaviors, looking at video. And then Sella, my colleague, and I did a play of an adult education situation, and they analyzed that. Then several opportunities to role play themselves. We had 3 other scenarios. The people worked in groups of 3, and each person got a chance to be the coach, the G, and the observer, and discuss each one of those scenarios. And by that was the end of the day, and so we looked at what we're planning the future, what the expectations are for the rest of the year. So the expectations are to work on addressing the curriculum gaps, to continue coaching individuals and or groups of teachers. Your instructional leader. So you coaches and your coaches are really your instructional leaders, or maybe your instructional leaders of the future. So we just want to, and we're doing our best to encourage them to see themselves that way, to see themselves as leaders in the realm of their, with the other teachers, and to develop the capacity to do this training on their own. And the assignment to read about student assignments, analyzing student assignments. And that would be the focus of the webinar on March 1st and 2nd. Did I say anything about that? I didn't. I did here. So now I'm going to tell you about the webinar that hasn't happened yet, but will in a week or two. So we'll review the behavior checklist. People also did an online survey about their own strengths and weaknesses in relation to each of the items on that list. So we'll give some feedback about that. And then go into analyzing student assignments. And I have examples of looking at the assignment, then looking at the student work, and seeing how it went. If there's problems, what are the problems, and how we need to address those? Do we need to reteach part of it? Did everybody miss part of it, or did only a few people miss it, and some people need to be able to move on? And look at, let's say everybody got it, then how can we, what's the next step? How can we make that assignment more rigorous or move on to the next content area? So that's what we'll be looking at in March. The steps of the student assignment, I think I just talked about these. Into the assignment, analyze the demands, compare. I left out this important part, which was to look at the assignment and think about what standard is it related to and how is it doing in terms of meeting that standard, helping students meet that standard. And then diagnose student work and ratchet up the assignment. So this is a diagram from Standards in Action. So this is just another way of looking at the same things. And this is what's coming up, the post-webinar. And so we now have these at 2 different times. Not everybody was thrilled with Friday at 4 p.m. So now it's Thursday at 1 p.m. or Friday at 4 p.m. Except the first follow-up one in March is Wednesday at 2:30 or Friday at 4. And then the next 2 in April and May are Thursday at 1 or Friday at 4. So there's email if you want to send me any suggestions for future webinars, or if you have any questions or you want to see any of the materials. All the materials are posted in the COP. So as soon as we finish a training or a webinar, the slides are posted, the handouts are posted, and the actual video is posted, but that takes a little while. Mike just mentioned that the teacher evaluation forms need to be revised to show the content standards are implemented. Will you clarify that? I don't know if I can clarify that, because I don't think we've talked about teacher evaluation forms. But it makes sense that you're looking for implementation of content standards. We haven't looked at that, though, specifically haven't talked about that. Who else has thoughts about that, revising the teacher evaluation form? I don't know if I haven't seen a teacher evaluation form. Anybody else with that issue? Okay, so they said there was a template for that. I think the templates that we have were really for the coaches. I'll look back and see if I can think of what it's referring to, but I think that differently than I meant to. Yes, there's a template for looking at classroom practice and looking for the standards. There's a 3-page survey that comes from Standards in Action, and that's been in their handouts. And I can send you that, but I'm certainly not saying use this form when you evaluate teachers. That wasn't the intention of that. That was for coaches when they're looking at what's happening in the classroom to look for specific behaviors. And I do think it's a really useful survey because it kind of covers everything. So it's looking at if you want to revise your teacher evaluation form, but it's pretty demanding. I wouldn't want to be evaluated on that because it's looking for everything that you might do, and you're pretty much not going to be able to do everything in one classroom evaluation, one class observation. So it's more of a teaching tool, like here's all the things that we're looking for, and how can we make sure these are happening, and which one of these do you think you need to work on, or would you like to work on more? That's the intention of it more than evaluation, an evaluation form. So it helps. Any questions? Yeah, that's my thinking right now. And if there's more questions, just email me. Okay, then. Short and sweet. That's what's happening. That's all I got for you. So let me know if you have any questions or post in the COP, or you would like to contact us all. Thanks so much for spending half an hour with me, seeing what's going on. I hope it's helpful for you in implementing the standards in your program. That's the goal.
Thanks so much, Ann, for presenting today, and thanks everyone for joining us. And we'll stay online for just a few minutes. If there's some questions that come in, we always like to stay on for just a few minutes after. But we thank you all, and I hope you're staying safe and warm and out of the rain that seems to be across Texas right now. So everybody take care, and thank you.